much for joining us here in the beginning of the new year. My name is Dr. Jason Lane. I have the great privilege of being the Dean of the School of Education here at the University at Albany, and excited to have you join us. What will be a really engaging conversation focused on literacy, and we just moved slides there, so I couldn't do the whole title, Jerry. Can you go back for a second? There we go. We can flip a minute. On being proactive, cultivating literacy through engaging lens. I just want to take a minute to pause and recognize the horrific events that are happening in our nation's capital. Right now, they are unfolding. As we are in this conversation, in many ways, to me, as I read the title, it brings new meaning to literacy and the multiple levels of literacy that are important, I think, for a democracy and for a country such as ours. And just to say that our thoughts and prayers are with those in the Capitol right now, and that we hope that all of this, I think, resolves in the best possible way. We'll see where it goes, but I think it's important that our thoughts are with them also right now. We created edTrends as a way to bring the community together to talk about important issues affecting education, mental health, and communities. It came really out of the onset of the pandemic, when we realized how important it was to stay connected, and in this case, connected through a digital way and Zoom, as we all are on today. But it's important, I think, for us to continue some of these conversations. And so my thanks to Jerry Rivera-Wilson for her leadership in moving forward with the edTrends, and for all of you who have been with us for what is nearly a year now, as we have tackled critical issues facing education, both here in the Capital Region and across the United States. We set forth to do this in part because we have been a leader in the space of online learning and teaching for a number of years now. We've been teaching people how to teach online for a number of years, and we thought it was important to share that with folks, but it has grown, I think, into so much more, and such a fabulous community. You can check some of the resources that we put together on our website, remoteed.org. I think we can flip to the next slide there, Jerry. There's over 1,500 curated resources now for those of you who are managing education either in the classroom or at home. These are resources curated by our faculty and graduate students and organized by subject matter and grade level to help you better understand what resources might be available for you. We've also been working through our Academy for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning, of Teaching Leadership in Schools Atlas, to begin to sort of think to offer professional development for folks who are in the space as well. Next slide. For those who are interested, CTLE hours are available for spending time with us. If you are interested in receiving CTLE for this session or others, I would encourage you to reach out to Atlas, Dr. Jerry Rivera-Wilson, for that. She'll walk you through that process. Next slide. And we have, as I mentioned earlier, we meet weekly. We have some exciting events coming up on effective learning and the online experience with some of our partners, January 13th, January 27th. Experts in the field coming from across the nation to talk with us about effective ways to engage in online learning. We know a number of our students in the Capital Region are in this space, and every week who's in that space as schools trying to navigate this process. So we encourage you to turn in for those important sessions. We have a great lineup of speakers here with us today. Oh, one more. We have the book study dates. We are doing a great event here on grading for equity. Really the ways that we can use grading in more effective ways. For those who may have turned in for the first two sessions with Joe and Mark, just phenomenal thinkers, speakers, helping us reconceptualize the power of grading in a positive way to support all students. And we've been organizing a book study, collective book study with them, and upcoming sessions are on the 20th, 17th, and the 24th. So would encourage you to check in on those. But now to the real focus here today, our literacy experts who share with us their thoughts on this new environment we're in and how it's affecting literacy and answering some of your important questions. So, Jerry, I'm going to turn it over to you. And I'm noting that there in the comment box, folks are saying that there's an issue with you. So maybe if all the speakers could go on mute until we speak, I don't know if that might help solve the situation.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I have the privilege of introducing today's panelists and our moderator, Dr. Cheryl Dozier. Dr. Cheryl Dozier is an associate professor in the Department of Literacy and Teaching and Learning here at the University of Albany. So is Dr. Stephanie Affinito, who is a clinical faculty member and researcher on literacy and media. And so I'm thankful for her being able to join us today. We also have Laura McDaniel, and she is with the Capital Region BOCES. She is the P12 Curriculum and Instructional Coach. Jennifer Style is doing a return visit to us on edTrends. She was with us in the spring, and we're happy to have her again. She's the reading specialist for the Bethlehem Central School District. We have Christina Taylor. She is the English Department Chair and English teacher at Corinth Central School District. Thank you, Christina. I know this is your first time with us, and we're happy to have you. And also her first time with us is Jean Winkler. She's the director of the ELA and Library Media K-12 at the Niskuna Central School District. I also need to let everyone know that today's special session is a partnership, a collaborative that we have with the Capital Region BOCES. And with that, I turn it over back to Cheryl Dozier, again, a faculty member here at the University of Albany in the Department of Literacy and Teaching and Learning. Cheryl?
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you so much for this afternoon's panel. Happy New Year to everyone joining us. I'm so excited by our panel, so excited to have the opportunity to talk about literacy and to talk about engagement. And I think about how I came to understand engagement in new ways through my work with Dr. Brian Camborne, who is a professor and Reading Hall of Fame member from Wollongong University in New South Wales, Australia, who talks about the importance and centrality of helping learners become active and seeing themselves as potential doers, potential readers, potential writers, potential poets. So I think we are in for an incredibly exciting afternoon. And Jerry, you're going to get perfect. All right, so our first question is, how do we keep literacy engagement at the heart of our teaching and student learning? So I'm going to ask Jen Steele if she'll begin the conversation. And then once Jen has shared her thoughts, we'll have other members of the panel join in as well. So thank you, Jen, for starting us off.
Sure thing. So I'm going to follow up from what you were talking about, Dr. Dozier and Brian Camborne. Because one of the things I learned from him was that the importance of knowing your students. And so engagement being key, knowing your students, their likes, their dislikes, their hobbies, their families, connecting with families early and often, knowing your students' strengths, where they are, so you can build from that point forward. And providing your students with choice. So knowing your students' interests and being able to say, well, I know this student is interested in this and this student has a very similar interest. Maybe I will put them in a group together and give them a choice between 3 books on that specific topic, or bridging off from that topic. And being able to work with things that interest your students. For example, today I had a student talking about his new puppy, and he was saying that the puppy they had originally named the puppy Marshmallow, but decided that they were going to change that name to a different name, which happened to be much shorter. And we built that right into our work in syllables, because marshmallow can be quite difficult to say when you're telling a puppy not to do something in the house. And so we talked about why people have nicknames, and we clapped out syllables in the new name of the puppy and the original marshmallow name of the puppy, and which one would be quicker and easier to say. So being able to build off the things in their world keeps interest and keeps students engaged.
And if there was ever a time to say ditto to all that, I think it's now. Completely agree, and actually made some very similar connections myself. And, you know, I kind of looked at it through the lens, like the how piece for me is really in intentional planning, right? And that comes from knowing your students, and it brings in the relevancy and the connection to literacy that will then ultimately engage them. So, you know, in terms of intentional planning, thinking first about knowing your content or your grade level and exactly what skills and concepts students absolutely must master by the end of that content course or grade, and really prioritizing those so you have the content out of the way. And then on the day-to-day, you can ask questions like exactly what you were saying. What do my kids enjoy? What topics are they interested in, right? What are their strengths or areas of growth? How can I personalize and really frame this lesson or series of lessons in a way that will connect literacy with life? So ditto and echo to all of that, and just really planning for accessibility and the relevancy of literacy in our day-to-day instruction.
I'll jump in with a third ditto. Oh, I'm sorry, Christina, do you want to go?
No, you go, Stephanie.
Again, I think we'll all just start seconding and thirding what everyone is saying. But thinking about the relevancy for students, the thing that helps me really keep engagement central is asking that question of what matters most, right? Whatever activity or whatever we're doing with students, whether they're my teachers that I work with or actual little people, is what matters most. And if I were to think about that very activity from their perspective, what would they walk away with? What would they walk away with? But not only in content, but what would they believe about reading and writing and literacy from that activity? And thinking about that from their perspective often helps me engage or maybe re-engage what I was doing to make sure that they're walking away with these beliefs about learning and about literacy that I really want them to have. All you, Christina.
Okay, thank you. I was just going to say that, you know, as a high school teacher, I know one of the big things I try to do to encourage student engagement is to offer them a lot of sort of no risk opportunities to be engaging in reading situations or writing situations. And when I say no risk, I mean, like, maybe there's not a grade attached to it. Maybe they're not going to be measured sort of for what they're doing. One of my favorite assignments to do with my seniors, for example, is I call it the Google and. So we'll be working on whatever literary text and whatever issues sort of come up, even if it's a text that's set in a different time period, are always going to be relevant in some way today. So I will ask them, you know, here's a topic, let's say patriarchy, do a Google patriarchy and something you're passionate about, you know. So I have students who've done patriarchy and athleticism, patriarchy and politics. And so what starts to happen is they don't realize it usually in the moment, but they're starting to engage in ways that are meaningful to their lives. And, you know, suddenly the excitement starts to increase, and they start to understand maybe why would I read a book, let's say like Of Mice and Men in 2020? Well, here's why, because I can learn some things about disability and about you know, gender, et cetera. And so that's one of the things I try to do in each of my units, is try to find some way to give them a sort of a no risk entry point into the work.
It's hard to go last, but but one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot with teachers, and what I've been thinking about redefining, or at least being able to take several steps back around what you define as texts. And I think this kind of connects to some of the things that you guys were saying about knowing your students, is that when I think about my own literacy practices and how different they are compared to what I did when I was 13, and yet I still feel like there's a lot of emphasis on including those texts that I read when I was 13. So, you know, paying attention to what kids are using and how they're communicating with each other and how we are in our own lives, and highlighting those texts in your classroom. So for, intermediate students and even secondary students, thinking about podcasts and how they get information, how quickly even news articles come at them, and how they manage that. So just kind of thinking about what is text and what is worthy of study in your classroom, and really expanding that thinking.
That sets us up beautifully for question 2, which is what literacy strategies and practices have been effective to engage students during the pandemic? And so Christina, I'm going to ask you to start the conversation. Thank you.
Sure. So yeah, this is one of those things that, I'm in a couple of different teacher chats where we're all trying to pool resources. This is a hard one. I think especially for literacy strategies, because, any engagement we have with reading and writing and language really requires us to have conversations and build relationships. And sometimes that's difficult when you are staring at a Zoom screen, let's say. So what we've done a lot in my district is try to find sort of modifications to that. So normally in my classroom, I might have my kids get up and have a quick conversation with their peers and walk around the room. Now I might post a question and they end up anonymously answering the question through the Google Classroom. Or I will ask them to read a passage and then I'll ask them to design a tweet, try to adopt that kind of language and figure out sort of what kind of audience would be listening to their message. So, the thing that's great about, the digital world is that there are many things out there. I think a lot of us can probably agree we've learned how to use some of those apps and programs that have been available for a long time that we haven't really had to sort of engage with, but our hands have been forced. And so oftentimes I will assign a short movie, or I will have my kids do a Kahoot. I will have them do an ed puzzle where they're engaging with a video and having to write something in response to that. They really do respond well to that. I think it's for all the reasons that Jean was just mentioning. The way that they engage with text today is probably 99% digital in their own worlds. And so it's almost intuitive and natural for them to grab onto those things. And along the way, they teach us as educators too. They help me every single day. Oh no, Mrs. Taylor, try this. So it's kind of the greatest frustration, but also a really big reward when you do actually find things that work.
Love the way you're connecting with the co-learner model too. You're learning from them as they're learning from you in this new space. Beautiful. Anyone else like to take this question?
Yeah, Christina said something really, I think, just incredibly important, which is that your district is focused, if I'm interpreting what you're saying correctly, is really just modifications for what you would have normally done in the classroom. And I think as I was thinking about this question, and I have the very lucky ability to be able to go into multiple classrooms and multiple grade levels and districts. And honestly, the things that I've seen work in terms of engagement, especially around literacy, are the things that teachers have always done. They're just finding new and creative ways to present them in a different format or utilize a different tool. So things like, explicit phonics instruction, building background knowledge, providing students choice, even something as simple as embedding humor or inside jokes with students, really to build community. Those are the things that, while our format might change and we have to get creative with that, certainly, I think what doesn't change is that quality, personalized literacy instruction that has always had big bang for the buck. We're just getting more creative with how we're doing it now.
I'm going to jump off of that if that's all right. I'm going to ditto you this time, Laura, because I agree with that wholeheartedly. And one of the things that I've been working on this year a lot is trying to find new ways with the littlest learners to engage them in movement, because we know that anything tactile, or, practicing letters and letter sounds and things of that sort. I used to be able to do sand and Play-Doh and that sort of thing. And that's much harder now because everybody needs individual supplies and materials. But finding ways to do those things, whether they're in person and maybe we're air writing or we're writing on with our fingers on the table, or if they're virtual and I have students doing things like working on fluency with songs or nursery rhymes or doing plays. Those are things I would do in school, but sometimes now I can't do that. Our students, when we're in person, we're not singing in the classroom or shouting out. So we have to adjust those. But when they're home, that's something that I can do with them. So just thinking about the things that are enjoyable that we can build into our day-to-day activities in different ways.
And I agree with both of what you said. And I think one of the things that I don't know if it's necessarily just literacy strategies, but one of the things that I've found have been really successful in all the classrooms that I've gone into are teachers who really have built routines and structures so that kids know what's going to come. And that's always important. I mean, it always has been, but and then once you do that, you can really layer in a lot of these things that you're trying out. So I was in a kindergarten classroom and the teacher had done a writing workshop and it was time for the share. And we were fortunate that we have small kindergarten sections. So the students are all together all the time. The teacher doesn't have to teach remotely, but it also has the challenges Jen just talked about, which is that little kids can't touch and play like they used to in kindergarten, and share session on the rug doesn't happen. So instead, this teacher had students at their desks that are, socially distanced, and they did a gallery walk of the writing that they had done that day, or something that they were proud of in their writing portfolio that they had been, drawing. And, it was so interesting. I knew that those routines were already established because the kids they knew, they paused at the desk, they looked, they glanced over at the person next to them and said, I really like how you, and those kind of routines that would have happened in the classroom anyway, but seemed very natural in an environment like this.
I'll be the last one to hop in. And thinking about routines, we've learned, the teachers that I have been working with over the past couple of months, we've been figuring out how to offer literacy intervention online. And so all of our old routines of word tiles and picture sorts, we've all had to figure out how to move into a digital space. But we've also learned that we need new routines to keep little kids engaged on a screen for 30 to 40 or however many minutes long our sessions might be. And so we've been designing new digital routines that mostly are focused on connection and community. So playing Four Corners on Google Jamboard, or playing Would You Rather with a Google form and seeing the results come in, or making really cool word clouds live as a starting point to kind of hook kids in to get to that screen, and then figuring out where we jazz things up as we keep going to keep them engaged, Zoom to Zoom.
Yes, Zoom to Zoom, right? Some days we're going from Zoom to Zoom to Zoom to Zoom. So what are some ways we can promote literacy engagement? We'll extend the conversation we've just now started at the elementary, middle school, and high school levels. And Laura, thank you for taking this one.
Certainly, it's my pleasure. And I mean, promoting literacy is easy, right? Because it's so much fun. But truthfully, I think overall, just showing passion and excitement for literacy. And then in addition to that, really modeling reading and writing at school and at home, right? Parents too, not just for learning, but also the idea of literacy as enjoyment, right? Making literacy relevant, like we had mentioned before. So I know as a mother personally, I have a 5-year-old son. I make a really concerted effort every night to close the computer, put down the phone, pick up a book or pick up my journal, and actually model for him that literacy is something that I enjoy doing and interacting with and building my skills in. And it's actually part of my life, right? Literacy as life. And I feel like the more we can kind of make clear for kids that literacy is integrated, I mean, in everything from texting a friend to writing a research paper, the more students will be able to make connections themselves and really see themselves as literate human beings with expression and communication. again, being lucky enough to be in multiple classrooms, some really tangible ways I've seen folks do this. And Jean mentioned this earlier with like, what is text, the idea of what is text, right? Pulling in something that you might not normally teach or pull in, like a graphic novel or film, or even a different genre that you generally don't touch. Those small shifts that we can make to our instruction and our pedagogical practices, those can actually catch students that we wouldn't normally catch, or engage students that we normally wouldn't engage in a different way. And in terms of writing, I mean, free writes, journaling, there's so many ways to promote a healthy relationship with literacy while also still honing in on unnecessary skills. And lastly, I'll just say, also utilizing free resources, not overwhelming them, right? We want to keep it simple and keep it to the basics. And I'm sure that routines and procedures will continue to come up as a really important topic in this conversation. But there's a lot of websites that, generally weren't free, but are still free because of the pandemic. And I know that districts are also providing a lot of free resources. And a lot of these resources are framed with a sense of engagement in mind. So in that way, in terms of like the gamatization of lessons, the work is already essentially done for you. So utilizing the resources that you have and really just connecting literacy with life and modeling for students that literacy is fun.
So I'll jump in here just because, one of our big projects too at my district is trying to improve transference between disciplines. So often students are sitting in their social studies class and they're mastering how to do a DBQ or whatever it might be. And then for some reason, when they enter the English classroom, they forget maybe to apply some of those skills. And so, often what we're trying to do is share language between departments so that, when we're talking about reading strategies in an English class, they're going to hear those same terms in their social studies class and their science class. And then, a magical thing can happen, at least for kids at that level. They start to realize that some of the things that we are doing in our classroom, day-to-day activities, are useful to them outside. Right now, my seniors are working on looking at argument. And so we're looking at political cartoons as texts. And we're starting to understand sort of, the fact that writers use rhetorical strategies to manipulate us, and that keen readers need to be able to sort of understand what those strategies might be, so they can make sort of sound judgments that then can lead to their sound choices in the political realm. And I think, maybe this is a slight exciting moment, even though there's so much going on in the world. I think that young people, high schoolers, are really, really engaged in what's happening in the world right now. They're on all of their social media. And so it's an opportunity to help them understand that the work we do in the classroom makes them better citizens out in the world. And it's so satisfying to have them make those revelations, those figuring that out in class, and figuring out that this isn't just busy work, it's life work, and that being really engaged in thinking and reading and writing is going to help them be the kinds of citizens they want to be.
I'm going to jump in because you made me, I always go back to Daniel Pink's research on motivation, the idea that people need mastery, they need to have purpose, and they need to have autonomy. And what you were just talking about is that whole idea about purpose, like what I'm learning has a bigger impact than just the classroom walls. And I've seen teachers do that, even in something as simple as a lot of teachers use I can statements or we can statements. And we worked with a consultant a couple of years ago who said, you got to push it a little bit further than that. It's not just I can, it's I can so that I can. So they understand what they're doing and the why they're doing it. And I've seen this whole kind of combination of being able to master something because they want to get better at it. So when you introduce something and you say, this is going to be just like they have on the state test, is very different than, I love reading these stories because I get to know people that I've never met before. Like that's a different way of approaching it. And it's because it matters. You want to get better at reading stories like that. And then I think about some of the teachers who have dabbled in things like the Genius Hour, or even some who have extended that, where students have a lot of autonomy in what they're deciding on what they want to study and where they want to go. And I see that as an expansion of, I am a big fan of a workshop model where teachers are very explicit and direct in instruction for focused strategies and skill development, but there's also a wide range, as Jen mentioned earlier, choice. And being able to take that knowledge and that invitation to new learning and apply it to things that are important to them. So yeah.
I'm going to build off of that, Jean, and just talk about how when you give students authentic and meaningful reading and writing activities, no matter the grade level, they can improve the school, they can improve their community, they can be a part of the world they live in. And that's really powerful for kids. And as a result, they become quite engaged in it. The other thing I was thinking about while listening is that with the virtual world now open and at our fingertips, we have the opportunity to connect with people that we wouldn't normally think of connecting with in the classroom. You know, for years and years and years, there's been reading buddies in my building where fifth graders work with first graders and kindergartners, and they meet together and they read together, or they write together, or they spell together. And that has, in many ways, it had stopped. But teachers are finding new ways to do reading buddies. You can have reading buddies in your building, but you can also have reading buddies in other buildings within your district, but other buildings across district. You could have high schoolers working with kindergartners. You know, maybe there's, you know, a class at the high school level that's working on children's literature, and they can come in and work in breakout rooms or in small groups or on your screen if you're in person. And you can have visiting authors and visiting writers and people from around the world come into your classroom in a way that we've never had before. So in many ways, we have an opportunity to build engagement that we really haven't done in the past. And it's a great way to take advantage of that. As well as enjoying books together and finding ways to connect in book clubs. And think about the book clubs. You can have book clubs across an entire district or across multiple districts where kids and families can come together and share and talk about books in authentic, fun ways.
All right, Stephanie, did you want to take the end of this one and then start right into question 4 in a moment? Or shall we head right to question 4?
We probably could head right to question 4 because they're so connected. I think everything that we've said so far builds up to this question. Thinking about, you know, how can we differentiate literacy instruction during the pandemic? And as I mentioned earlier, much of my work in teaching through the pandemic has been working with teachers and students to figure out what literacy intervention could look like, which is all about being responsive and differentiating. And, you know, hindsight's 2020. So, you know, when we look back and think, okay, what did we do in the moment, you know, when things were new versus what can we do now that we have all of this experience behind us? You know, we're not going to look back and say, I wish I assigned one more assignment on Google Classroom, or I wish I did just, you know, one more pair deck or one more ed puzzle, right? It's not about the tools. So differentiating instruction involves everything we've talked about so far, which is knowing your students and being able to meet them where they are, both in terms of their academics as well as their emotional state of being as well. And so we have found really great success with 2 particular things. There's lots of tools we've tried. We have fallen in love with Jamboard. We're relying on Padlet. We are Flipgriding all over the place to get students' voice in there. But two tools have really worked well for us, especially in this intervention space. And one of them is creating virtual classroom libraries using Padlet. So trying to give kids access to books and access to appropriate, interesting, and engaging books so that they can have them at home, even if they can't get their hands on physical copies. So Claire Landrigan has created this amazing resource that I'll put into the chat in just a moment. She's actually created a virtual book room completely designed for teachers to kind of go and copy and lift her digital book baskets into their own Padlet walls. And so we've spent lots of time creating Padlet walls for kids and groups where when they go to that Padlet, they know there'll be books there that will be just right for them, not just in terms of the readability of the book, but of the interest of the genre, of the topic, of the format as well, which is important for all students, but especially students who might be experiencing difficulty and still need that practice, especially need that practice from home. And so Padlet virtual libraries have been wonderful, but we've also really leaned into Hyperdocs, which are, kind of these, I don't want to say digital worksheets because worksheet conjures up this, old-fashioned passive kind of learning, but it's a digital document, usually a Google Doc of some sort, that kind of curates a learning experience together and paces students on a journey of learning about a certain topic, but giving them a lot of choice and a lot of freedom in what they read and how they respond to what they're learning. And so I've really utilized writing notebooks as Hyperdocs and helping to use Hyperdocs to spark students to continue to write from home, not just because I want them to practice their spelling or I want them to do an assignment, but we tried to get the point across to our kids that right now, you are all historians. Everything you write down 50 years from now could be seen as this, magical information about what that crazy year of 2020 was like. And so using the technology to help them read and write wherever they are, but make that easier and more accessible for them in all of their different locations that they're working from. So those are the two that have really worked for us.
I will jump on the Padlet boat as well. I love a good Padlet for differentiation, Stephanie. I'm really glad that you brought that up as a tool. And when we think about differentiation, we're not talking about something in addition to quality instruction, right? Like differentiation is embedded in good instruction. And so one of the things that I also urge teachers to really consider as they think about differentiation is how are they maximizing their tier 1 instruction to begin with, right? So looking at the hits, those high impact teaching strategies. I mean, and Jean brought it up earlier, something as simple as like a clear learning target with the what, why, and the how to acknowledge Jean's addition to the why as well, right? Paired with a really great formative assessment. That something as simple as that provides not only the necessary feedback for students and their engagement, and also gives you as the teacher, of course, just irreplaceable data to be able to then figure out what to differentiate and who to differentiate for. So once we've kind of established that we are indeed maximizing our tier 1 instruction, then we can start thinking about different strategies. And I love the use of Padlets. I've seen that so much. Also the use of breakout rooms to provide guided reading or skill groups. I've also seen some really creative work with asynchronous videos. So, teachers asynchronously recording themselves beforehand, right? Not in the moment. And then providing that video as direct instruction for a group of students, while then pulling another group of students who've been able to provide them and support them with needs. So I think all in all, focusing first on really tight tier 1 instruction and then providing multiple opportunities for things like reflection and feedback will allow folks to really make the most informed decisions on who and how to differentiate and then match the tool to the instruction and not the other way around.
I have to jump in there because I had two things that I wanted to talk about for this. And one is using Screencastify or Google Meet or however you do recording, because I agree, I haven't seen enough of it. And I did just get some feedback about one that went out last night where my presentation wasn't very enthusiastic. But that being said, I think that instructional videos can serve a lot of different purposes. And like even if it's something where it's an opportunity for our students who need directions repeated, that if you start with an assignment that you know everyone has at the secondary level and you post that in your Google Classroom, here are the directions. You don't have to say it 5 times. And when a kid comes into class late, it's already posted there. And if a parent wants to know what it is, if the student lets them access that, they can go back to it. So starting small with something like that, because it is a little bit daunting, you want to have it right. But it also allows this idea where, and one of you had talked about earlier, divide and conquer. So if you're working with a team of teachers at your grade level or on your team, and you know that there are some things that you want to have that are similar across all 3, divide and conquer. You do the math lessons, you do the ELA lessons. And I just think it's such a good use of time, and people are getting better at it because we see ourselves on screen all the time now, and we're getting used to that. And it's really helpful too, because I know a lot of teachers will use like Khan Academy videos to try to teach some strategy lessons for bigger concepts. And those are awesome. But I do think that it's really helpful for parents sometimes to be able to see how you taught it to students and the language that you use, because then they can use that at home when they're trying to support their students. So in addition to supporting students and differentiating, I think it also is a way to connect with families in meaningful ways. And then the other thing that I haven't yet kind of encouraged folks to try, but I think we can get there, is that I want teachers to think about differentiating, using what they know and rebuilding from there. So, you know, if you have novels that you've loved and have been anchor texts for you, but you just can't get through all of them, you can still use those as models for an independent reading unit where kids are reading their own books. You're showing them how your author, in the book that you love, if you've read The Outsiders and you have 1,000 different, you know, notes for every page, you can choose the things you want to point out in that novel to kids and show them how that writer does it, and then ask them to look for it in the books that they're reading. You don't necessarily get the same result that you would if you were all reading a whole novel together, but it helps to take a place where teachers are and are comfortable with in a time that there's a lot of uncomfortableness, and kind of build from there. So not thinking that you have to throw everything out, but take what you're doing and kind of modify it a little bit.
Yeah, and I would say that one of the things that initially when we started using it as a district was irritating to me, Google Classroom has become such an amazing tool for us because, you know, I can sort of provide folders full of tools for students to use or not use. And so that sense of autonomy is there, you know, so the pre-instructional videos I might make for something that's particularly complex, they can access multiple times. No one's going to know they've done it a million times, let's say. And also though, for my higher level performing students, they have some more challenging things that are there. So even if sort of the basic level of the daily lesson seems to be middle of the road and isn't hitting all of the places where my students are, there is a library of sorts available to them to sort of access at any given time. I also particularly love the breakout room option because it does sort of give me an opportunity, probably more so now than I could pre-pandemic, to do a lot of personal conferencing with students in ways that is sort of less intimidating for them. You know, before I might have a quiet conversation in a classroom, and now it's just the 2 of us, you know, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. And it's really been quite wonderful. The only other thing I would add to that is that, you know, like today, for example, I'm giving an independent assignment and I want to check in on my kids. And normally I would have gone and sort of perused my room and sat next to them and had a conversation or peeked at what they were working on. And now I can actually be in their document with them live. And so I can kind of tell when they're stuck and I can offer encouragement. I had a student today who started typing a wonderful answer, and then she stopped for a long time and she started deleting. And then I'm typing to her, wait, this is wonderful. Keep this going, you know? And so that ability to sort of pivot and apply some of those strategies that we have sort of traditionally done in X, Y, and Z ways is wonderful. And even though I wasn't the biggest fan, I've really sort of come and turned the corner on that. I think it's a wonderful tool.
just wanted to mention one of the things the teachers around me have struggled with at the beginning of the year this year is being in person, because virtually, I think the small group work we can do in many different ways, but in person differentiating is a little bit more challenging because we can't get into small groups and we can't move to the back table. And so some of the things that I've seen the teachers around me working with in the classroom is actually having the students working, if everybody's working on something independent, getting the small group on the computer with their headphones, still being able to do that small group work in that way. It's a little different, not ideal, but it does work. Keeping the seating chart in your classroom somewhat flexible. So being able to maybe once a week, maybe every other week, rearrange the classroom in seating so that your small groups are sort of spaced near each other when you can. Doesn't always work, but it does work sometimes. And as far as strategies being, I've seen quite a few teachers using, I can never remember what they call them, but the little cardboard dividers between each other and putting the strategies those students need, or the word wall, right inside their little personal space so that they have what they need individually right there in front of them and they're still in their little space. So I just wanted to mention those things.
Can I jump in with one other thing? Because Jen, you made me think of something that I know many of our secondary teachers are challenged by, is that they have students in front of them and they have students at home. And every time I get a chance, I encourage them to, it's very much okay, give yourself permission to set a group of those students off to do something so that you can, if you've got 6 kids in front of you and 12 are at home, give the 12 at home time to do some asynchronous work, and then leave the 6 that are also doing asynchronous work, but you can conference with those kids. And then on the flip side, on the day that those other kids that were at home are now in the classroom, do the same thing. Because it is hard when you want to kind of talk to a group of kids, but some of them aren't even in front of you and some of them are. So how do you balance your time? And I do think that if you're lucky enough to have a one-to-one district where kids have devices with them in school and at home, you can do what Jen just said with the kids in front of you as well.
So that will be the perfect segue into talking about ways to support engagement rather than simply compliance, and with a focus on community rather than accountability. So Jean, I'm going to ask you to stay unmuted and start the conversation.
So I think this is, it's been on my mind a lot. And I want to start by saying, first, I think I want to encourage everyone that you have to embrace the expectation that you're going to have to model and practice and give feedback and then do it all over again, rinse and repeat multiple times. Everything that we're doing right now is so new for us and for the kids that whenever we ask kids to try something, it might be the very first time they're doing it and they're certainly not going to get it. So don't be discouraged if things aren't working when you try that. The second is approach it with a growth mindset. So I've been, doing my teacher observations, and every classroom that I've gone into, whether it's on the screen or physically in, there's lots of different levels of engagement. And I think that teachers, you need to think about where you are with that group of students and where they're starting from and what are small steps they can take, because your first period class might look very different than your third period class. That's always been the deal here at the secondary level. So just keep that in mind. And then think about the small things that you can do with each of those rather than fall into the trap of comparing the groups of kids, because that doesn't get you too far. And then you also have to acknowledge your own limitations of what you can let go of. So I was in a classroom where we've been talking about engagement and whether kids should be required to have their screens on or not, and how do we get them engaged. And so this one teacher has really been driving home the use of the chat feature when they're in classroom in the meets. And I was observing her and I was watching all of this chatter in the chat, and it was driving me crazy because a lot of it had nothing to do with what they were doing at the beginning of class. And when we met afterwards, she was talking to me about it. She said, well, I encourage that. And sometimes I jump in and do that because there's been some students who have been so quiet that my goal for them is just to get them to engage with me and with some other students in the chat. So I realized that my own anxiety over it and how annoying that was and seemingly off task was actually an intentional move on that teacher's part. I do also think, because we've talked a lot about the small group breakout, and I encourage teachers to give themselves permission to use that and not feel like you have to have a product or oversight about what's happening when kids aren't with you in those other small group breakouts, because that has been it's an ongoing conversation about whether they're on task and whether they're actually doing what they should be doing. Are they being mean to each other? And those are things that happen in classrooms all the time, maybe not as overtly, but you have to know that and give yourself permission to be attentive to the kids that you're working with in the small groups. And someone had mentioned earlier about this idea about low stakes entry points. And I think that when you're trying to increase engagement and to think about low risk and quick, and oftentimes that can be, but make them public. So if you want students to be more engaged, that you require them at the end of class, before they say goodbye, they have to flip on their camera and wave goodbye to you so you can see their face. And thank them when they do the things that you've asked them to do. And then the other thing is, when I think about engagement, and a lot of teachers have talked to me, particularly at the secondary level, the pace at which they're moving with kids, and that they don't have that couple of minutes at the end of class to grab a kid and say, hey, how about? And again, this idea that it's very much okay for you to end class a few minutes early and let kids get started on homework and put them in individual breakout groups and and talk to a couple of kids about some work that they're missing or something you want to catch up on with. I know we're all strapped for time, but those 10 minutes a couple times a week can be really, really beneficial and go a long way for engagement for those kids, down the road.
Jean just mentioned so many ways to engage students, but it also, as for the question, is complete community building, right? And I can't let this question go by without talking quickly about the word accountability, because I feel like accountability as a word in itself does not need to be a dirty word, right? Everyone's accountable to someone or something. We all need a level of accountability, but we want our students to be accountable to themselves and to their learning and to the community and to others, right? And so for me, I think in addition to everything that Jean just mentioned, establishing really clear routines and expectations and a very clear success criteria for how you're going to assist students to support them to reach those expectations and build that community and build that engagement greatly supports that predictability needed for students to be able to function in a calm environment where they feel comfortable doing things like expressing themselves and making choices that will positively impact that classroom community, right? And the second piece, and we've talked about this a lot, is just the personalization piece. So something as simple as, creating an interactive Bitmoji classroom or spending 2 minutes, right? Which seems like a long time, but really isn't in the grand scheme of social emotional health and well-being, to just check in with students and ask how they're doing and be off topic, right? Intentionally off topic is actually on topic, right? There's just so many little things that we can do to contribute to this kind of sense of belonging and bridging community building and literacy together to really create a sense of deep community and of course, therefore deep learning, right? Those 2 minutes at the beginning of class will pay back tenfold when you have so many more engaged students in the community, and sense of community is much stronger.
I think a little bit too about another way to pull or increase engagement is to engage with the entire family when possible, when families are open to that. And again, I feel like our virtual world has been something really positive in that area. I've gotten an opportunity in such a unique and different way to be a part of families being online. I've met the dogs, I've met the cats and the birds and the lizards, and I've met family members and grandparents and babysitters and neighbors. So I think another way to build community and support engagement is to have opportunities to connect with families, whether it's informally during your lesson when, the dog sits on the lap, or intentionally when you have parent meetings in the evening where parents can come and you can talk about the strategies you're working on in the classroom, and share the language that you're using so that they can use that language at home, similar to what somebody else was saying earlier about having that common language across. And it also, you can have parent-child book clubs. I love connecting with parents around books, and another way to model the enjoyment of reading, and how many of their parents participate in book clubs for fun, and what a great way to model that in the evenings, um, you know, for again, just for enjoyment.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. Related to the book clubs, one of the groups of teachers and students I was working with this past spring, we were attempting to do book clubs, comprehension, reading response in a real authentic community-based way as we would sitting around a table. And we found all too easily and all too quickly, we kind of went back to relying on, well, read this chapter and then answer this question and then share it on Google Classroom, and then hopefully we'll be able to talk about it when we're online. And it was far too easy to slip back into that assign and assess mentality when it came to reading response and thinking through books. But like you said, in reality, books are what are saving many of us in this pandemic. We don't pick up the phone and quiz each other on the books. We, are using it to maintain our sanity. And so how can we teach kids to really engage in a real way with books that aren't just because we're reading them in school and I'm holding you accountable to it, but what do you think? What are you feeling? How's it changing the way you're thinking about yourself right now, about the world right now? And so we brought, the good old tools of Padlet and Flipgrid were there, but we did more work with, emojis and emoticons and documenting digitally what we were thinking and feeling, along with the content of the book. And so, just another way to bring that authentically in, like we started in the beginning, adults in the real world do this when we're reading, when we're writing. How can we use the digital tools we have to help kids do the same during this time too?
And I'll just add one last thing. I know for me recently, one of the big things that I've been working on is just trying to remember that, I'm teaching in a hybrid scenario and it feels sort of like robotic and weird and almost fake in some sense, but you could still connect with your kids in ways that sort of remind them of the humanity, being silly, being goofy, showing a little bit of your weakness, and I think that most recently, especially, I think my kids really appreciate that notion of helping them understand that we're on this journey together, and that we're going to have hiccups and we're going to have roadblocks, but we're going to figure out how to get through them together. And then being able to kind of laugh at ourselves about that, and then those moments where I really want them to like wave or say something or chat in the text, then they feel more willing to do that, because they can see me as a person and not just this face on a screen. So it's a constant daily reminder. I have to remind myself all the time to just be me. I actually just the other day convinced one of my students, she was struggling. She wants me by her side. She's in person 100%, and she wants me by her side to help her write every sentence. And so we wrote this wonderful paragraph together. And then I was like, and you've got this, you can do the second paragraph. And she didn't believe it. And I said to her, if you do the paragraph, if you just try, I will do the stupid dance. That's what I call it. And so like all the kids were waiting online, like Mrs. Taylor is going to do something ridiculous. And then she did it. And then I did it. And she's been working like a trooper since then. Those tiny little moments of like community, like we're all people. and we're building these relationships together, go so many miles. I can't express that enough.
Thank you, Christina. And that is just a beautiful, beautiful way to end our time together. We do have one more question. I think we'll have to save that one for our next time because I'm mindful that it's 5:01. And I always love to talk about the power, centrality of engagement and words we heard today: authenticity, choice, interest, relevance, community, intentionality, as we support our students to become citizens of the world, engagement with families. And so I thank everyone on the panel. I thank everyone who shared ideas from the chat. And what a beautiful, beautiful way to begin 2021, to think about how do we engage our learners and our families together. So thank you, everyone. And we are absolutely thrilled you joined us this afternoon. And Jerry, I'm not sure if you have any final moments.
Yes, I'm just going to echo what you said, Cheryl. Thank you all for joining us today, and many thanks to the panelists and sharing their information and the helpful resources and ideas and suggestions that can be applied immediately in the classroom and at home. And with that, Happy New Year, everyone, and thank you for joining edTrends today. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Until then, happiness, joy, and health.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's
And
awesome.
make sure you enjoy reading all the comments in the chat.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, guys.